Eastern European countries are starting to adopt Australia's refugee policy. With over 21,000 migrants being left stranded on the border of Croatia, the treatment of refugees is turning into a humanitarian emergency.
We sat down with Dr. Sarah Dem to discuss.
It's now been a good 3 decades of these very draconian policies towards refugees and asylum seekers, and they're policies that you haven't really seen replicated elsewhere, although increasingly, concerningly, some states in Eastern Europe are looking to Australia's process of border externalisation as a feasible way of dealing with unauthorised migrants, and that's a really concerning trend.
The Refugee Council has highly reported on how countries like Europe and Australia are acting wrongfully in penalising individuals for entering without valid travel documents by drawing matters back to Article 31 of Refugee Convention, which clearly states that individuals should not be penalised for entering without valid travel documents.
Successive governments, so both Liberal and Labor, have very successfully pushed a narrative that it has delegitimised people's right to seek asylum here. And so people do think, for example, that there is a legitimate process that people can come through and that people choose not to come that way without fully realising how difficult it is for people in major refugee source or countries of origin, such as Afghanistan or Iran or Syria, to actually access visas to come to Australia. And so coming through unauthorised routes, either by boat, is often the only option that they do have. And I think the public just doesn't understand that.
The misconceptions carried by the public is argued to be a reflection of secrecy laws.
I think there are huge issues concerning transparency of detention centres, both on the mainland and in offshore detention on PNG and Nauru. Nauru, for example, introduced a really expensive visa for journalists, over $8,000 for journalists to come to Nauru, and controlled who was able to access that visa, in order to make it more difficult for journalists, Australian journalists, to report on the conditions of refugees and asylum seekers in detention or in the community there. Similarly with, for example, the introduction of the Border Force Act, which placed strict penalties on people acting as officials under the Border Force Act, including, for example, medical practitioners or people engaged to offer welfare services. So, for example, the Salvation Army in offshore detention, it placed 2-year imprisonment penalties on these workers if they spoke out. So I think it's not just journalists that are affected by the secrecy provisions. It's also, there's very sort of strict legislative requirements around what people who work at detention centres can and can't say as well, and that makes it increasingly difficult for the Australian government, the Australian public, to get a rich or a more full sense of what's happening in our name in detention centres. So I think people have done amazingly well in coping for so long under very difficult conditions, but I think there's a limit to how long people can cope with that, and so something has to change.